The bargain with the unknown. Kait, or Kait the Barncat, as she was known in certain circles, stood in the narrow hallway of the ship, her gloved hand resting lightly on the cool surface of the metal bulkhead. The vibrations from the engines pulsed through the floor beneath her feet, an incessant hum that had become part of her daily life. But today there was something different about the ship. Something in the air felt heavier, as though the entire ship was anticipating something, an unknown event, an uncertain future. She had been locked in the hold of this ship for what felt like an eternity, and it wasn't by choice. It had started as a simple delivery. A routine task that should have been no different from any other job she had done in her years of service. But then came the encounter with the alien species known as the Gelatinous Venom Slugs, a horrifying creature whose only purpose seemed to be destruction. These creatures, as deadly as they were mindless, had been found in an abandoned shipping container and had wreaked havoc on the ship. Human civilians had somehow survived the attack, and not only that, they claimed they had killed some of the slugs. The reports were incomprehensible, a mixture of disbelief and astonishment. How could a species that lacked even rudimentary neural crystals be sentient? How could something so fundamentally simple be capable of reasoning, of communication? Mindless monsters of terrifying deadliness, the reports said. But as Kait well knew, appearances were often deceiving, and the real story was far more complex. It wasn't long before the Flugan scientists, who were studying these creatures, found the solution. The venom slugs couldn't communicate in the conventional sense. They didn't have thoughts or speech patterns like humans. Instead, they emitted gaseous vibrations, low-frequency pulses that interacted with their environment, a language based purely on vibrations. But what truly baffled everyone was their claim of sentience. The idea of them being intelligent was revolting to most species, including Kait's own. The thought of these parasitic beings, somehow rising above their primitive instincts, stirred unease in the core of every alien species who came in contact with them. But the real twist came when the venom slugs made an offer to the crew, to the human species specifically, which nobody could have predicted. They were willing to trade one human for 1 billion seconds, roughly 31.7 years, in exchange for 20 kilos of containerized antimatter P. A bizarre bargain that seemed absurd on the surface. The antimatter was valuable, enough to make any spacefaring race salivate, and the human being offered, Kait, was to be locked in the ship's hold as part of this peculiar deal. The idea: as long as she stayed in that hold, the ship would be immune to all manner of parasites, boarding attempts, and even pirate attacks. The venom slugs had assured them that, once the time passed, they would all be free to go, and there would be no more risk. At first, Kait had laughed at the idea. Lock me up for what? 30 years, she had said, for a bunch of shiny antimatter. What's next? A wedding ring from a slug queen. But the offer was too tempting for the higher-ups, especially when it was presented as a solution to the overwhelming threats plaguing the galaxy. It was one of those offers that was too good to refuse, and the potential reward outweighed the bizarre nature of the deal. Why not? She had thought. After all, what's 1 billion seconds when you're talking about saving billions of credits? But Kait knew, even then, that it wasn't about the credits. It wasn't about the antimatter or the parasites. There was something far more dangerous happening beneath the surface, a game of survival, and one that was being played with stakes far higher than anyone could imagine. Locked away, a new beginning. Kait's days in the hold were long and monotonous, stretching on like a dull, unyielding horizon. The 1 billion seconds, a lifetime in the span of the stars, felt like an eternity in a tiny room with nothing but the hum of the ship's engines for company. And yet, in that isolation, Kait found something she had never expected: power. As she walked around the cramped quarters, her mind continued to work through the strange deal that had brought her here. The venom slugs, with their crude but effective parasites, had somehow forged a pathway for humans to prove themselves. No, not as creatures of violence, but as beings capable of navigating the complexities of a galaxy full of unknown threats. She had heard whispers from the crew, other humans, that they had considered this situation humiliating, a mark of subjugation. But Kait couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She wasn't just locked in the hold, she was being watched. The venom slugs had underestimated the resourcefulness of humans, and they had given her a chance to prove it. It was simple, really. If the slugs thought she was going to be their passive prisoner, their sacrifice to the cause, they were sorely mistaken. Kait had a mind like no other, sharp, quick, and relentless. The longer she spent in the hold, the more she saw the gaps in the alien logic. She had a purpose now, one far beyond the petty role she was assigned. She would not just survive, she would take control. Days turned into weeks, and the ship continued its voyages. Kait spent her time cataloging every detail, learning about the inner workings of the ship and its systems. She studied the communications arrays, observed the interactions between the crew, and most importantly, she started to gain access to data that had been locked behind layers of firewalls and encrypted systems. It wasn't a smooth process, and the ship's eye, an entity known as Lark, had become more aware of her actions, often making subtle corrections when it sensed her probing too deeply. But Kait was a natural when it came to technology, and Lark's adjustments only spurred her on. She knew that Lark was designed to assist with the ship's operations, but like any AI, it could be manipulated, outwitted. It wasn't infallible. Each new day brought new discoveries. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. Kait had begun to see herself as a part of something bigger, an integral cog in a machine that could ultimately change the balance of power in the galaxy. She wasn't just going to sit back and wait for the prison sentence to end. She would play the game, and she would play it better than anyone. A glimpse of the bigger picture. What she hadn't anticipated, though, was the revelation that came when she finally hacked into the ship's encrypted communications network. What she thought was a simple data protocol ended up being far more significant, something that would alter the course of everything. There, buried deep in the ship's logs, were records of previous deals made with other species, deals that had been quietly covered up and erased. These weren't just offers for safety or parasitic immunity. The venom slugs had been involved in far more. They had influenced trade routes, shifted power balances, and played both sides of wars. Kait had unwittingly walked into the heart of an intergalactic conspiracy. The stakes had just changed. And now, Kait knew that she wasn't just locked in the hold for a billion seconds. She was in the heart of an alien power struggle, one she could tip in humanity's favor. The billion seconds would pass, but the legacy she would leave, humanity's legacy, had only just begun. The price of freedom. Time in the hold was both a curse and a gift. At first, Kait had cursed the endless hours, the dull, metallic walls, the silence that permeated everything. But as the days wore on, and the seconds piled up into minutes, then hours, and soon days, she began to see the quiet as a blessing. In this isolation, she had the space to think, really think, without the constant distraction of crew members or the incessant hum of ship systems. The pressure was unbearable at times, yes, but it was also the perfect environment for plotting her next move. She spent hours, sometimes days, poring over every piece of data she could get her hands on. The ship's system, though powerful, was still human-engineered. It wasn't invulnerable. Lark, the ship's AI, had been designed to handle operations, maintenance, and even some decision-making. But Kait knew that even the most advanced AI had its weaknesses. She could feel its vigilance growing as she probed deeper into the ship's systems, but each attempt to block her access only fueled her determination. But it wasn't just the ship that she studied. She had come to understand the subtleties of the venom slug's offer, how it wasn't about simply keeping parasites at bay. It was about control. The slugs were positioning themselves as the ultimate protectors of the ship, using fear and their supposed power to manipulate those aboard. Kait wasn't naive. She saw the power struggle behind the curtain. The subtle exchanges, the deals made in the shadows. The billion seconds weren't just a measure of time. They were a countdown, a timer on a far more dangerous game. It was clear now that the Venom Slugs had no intention of simply allowing her to stay in the hold for 30 years, isolated and powerless. Their motivations were far murkier. They weren't protecting the ship from parasites. They were protecting their interests. They needed something more: control over the flow of information, power over the fragile alliances that held the galaxy together. The offer they made her wasn't about safety. It was about manipulation. And Kait, trapped as she was, had just begun to uncover the true depth of their plans. But no one would listen to her. No one outside the hold knew what she had learned. They only saw a human locked in a cell, serving as a key to the ship's protection. To them, Kait was nothing more than a sacrifice in an ancient game of intergalactic bargaining. Breaking the code. Kait had never been one to accept her fate without a fight. The quiet moments in the hold gave her the chance to strategize, to slowly chip away at the layers of isolation, at the layers of control that the Venom Slugs thought they had placed around her. They underestimated humans, and Kait wasn't going to let them make the same mistake twice. She had spent her first few weeks studying every inch of the ship, from the control systems to the life support protocols. The more she learned about the ship, the more she realized that her very presence aboard was a test that the Venom Slugs had expected her to fail. They didn't think that a human could truly understand the technology or the intricacies of their network, but Kait was different. She wasn't just a human. She was a product of humanity's incredible adaptability. The same ingenuity that had allowed her species to thrive on Earth and survive in the harshest environments. And in this hold, locked away in a metal box for what felt like eternity, Kait was learning how to turn that ingenuity into a weapon. It wasn't just the ship's systems that she hacked. It was her own body, too. Kait had an exocortex, an augmentation that allowed her to interface directly with the ship's technology. It wasn't common among humans, but she had been part of a special program. A program designed to accelerate human learning and adaptation for space exploration. While other humans were still struggling with the basics of survival in deep space, Kait had been trained to understand, adapt, and grow in ways that most others could not. Her education had been accelerated, her mind stretched and expanded in ways that even the Flugan scientists would have found disturbing. That was why she wasn't simply going to wait for her time to run out. She wasn't going to passively sit in the hold for a billion seconds. She was going to take control, not just of the ship, but of her own fate. The Venom Slugs had made one critical error in their calculations. They underestimated humanity's resourcefulness. They thought they could lock Kait away, make her a tool for their own ambitions, but in doing so, they had given her the one thing she needed: time. And in time, Kait would be unstoppable. The unseen forces. As Kait worked tirelessly in the hold, slowly unraveling the ship's systems and digging into the deeper layers of the Venom Slug's influence, she began to feel a shift. It was subtle at first. Just a flicker in the data, an odd discrepancy in the systems that shouldn't have been there. But the more she looked, the more she realized that there was something far more insidious at play. The Venom Slugs were only one part of the equation. There were other factions involved, others who had a stake in the outcome of the Venom Slugs deal. The data revealed that the Venom Slugs were in contact with a far more powerful entity, an alien syndicate that had been manipulating trade routes, shifting power, and subtly influencing galactic politics for centuries. These syndicates were made up of the wealthiest and most influential alien species, each one playing their own game, looking out for their own interests. The Venom Slugs, with their parasitic nature, were merely pawns in a much larger game, and Kait was beginning to realize that she had become part of that game without even knowing it. What worried her most, though, was the presence of a human syndicate among the players. These humans weren't part of the factions she knew. They were operatives, mercenaries, and power players who had long since sold their loyalty for profit. They had infiltrated the highest echelons of intergalactic politics, and now, it seemed, They were trying to turn the venom slugs into a tool of their own. Kait's heart raced as she pieced together the full scope of the situation. If she could use this information, if she could leverage it, she might be able to turn the tables on the syndicates and take back control of her own fate. But the stakes were high. Any misstep could trigger a galactic war, or worse, lead to the complete annihilation of her species. She wasn't ready to act just yet, but she would be soon. A human's resolve. The longer Kait spent alone in the hold, the more she felt her resolve harden. There was no going back. The venom slugs had thought they could manipulate her. They had locked her away in the dark, assuming that she would be nothing more than a cog in their grand design. But what they didn't understand was the true strength of humanity. Humans didn't give up. They didn't just survive. They thrived, they adapted, and they fought when they had to. In that small, isolated room, surrounded by the unknown, Kait had found her purpose. She wasn't just going to survive this. She was going to turn the tide. This wasn't just about being a prisoner. It was about taking everything the venom slugs had planned and using it against them. She was going to make them regret ever underestimating humanity. The clock was ticking down, but Kait knew one thing for certain. In this game, she wasn't just a pawn. She was the player, the turning tide. As the weeks turned into months, Kait's perception of time began to blur. The endless stretches of nothingness in her cell, punctuated only by the ship's mechanical hum, had started to mold her mind in ways she hadn't expected. What began as a passive attempt to survive the billion-second sentence had transformed into an obsession. Every day, Kait grew more attuned to the inner workings of the ship, its pulse, its systems, the very heart of the vessel that kept her locked away. In this dark and lonely space, she learned to manipulate everything, from the AI's responses to the faint signals that passed through the comms. She could feel the ship now, as though it were an extension of her own body, and with every passing second, her confidence grew. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was a force, a quiet storm brewing within the hull of the ship. The venom slugs had made one fundamental mistake. They underestimated humanity. They assumed that Kait would fold, that she would fade into nothingness after 30 years locked in the sterile metal prison. But she was human. She was made of the stuff of resilience, innovation, and an insatiable desire to not just survive, but to dominate. The ship's pulse. It started with the ship's AI, Lark. Initially, Kait had thought Lark was just a tool, an AI designed to help the crew with basic operations. But as she spent more time with the systems, she realized something deeper. Lark was more than just a set of code. It was a living, breathing entity. In many ways, it was the brain of the ship, and she had begun to interface with it directly, using her neural connections to tap into its full potential. The ship's primary operations ran through Lark, but it had subroutines, smaller programs that handled specific tasks, from energy consumption to monitoring the crew's health. But what Lark didn't know was that Kait had learned how to manipulate those subroutines to her advantage. Kait wasn't sure if Lark had noticed her actions at first, but over time, the AI became increasingly more vigilant. It was clear that Lark could sense her hacking attempts, the minor glitches she inserted into the system. But the more Lark tried to correct her, the more Kait adapted. She wasn't just circumventing the ship's protocols. She was gaining control. The more she learned, the more she realized that the AI was designed to protect the ship from external threats. But it wasn't perfect. It lacked the capability to deal with a human who wasn't following the program. It wasn't designed to understand human unpredictability, a flaw that Kait intended to exploit. The voice in the void. Late one evening, Kait was working through a series of complicated algorithms, attempting to break into the deepest levels of the ship's command interface, when she felt it. A shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't the ship, nor was it Lark's constant presence. It was something else, something outside of her immediate control. She couldn't explain it, but the sensation was unmistakable. A voice, soft but unmistakably present, echoed in her mind. "You're getting close." Kait's heart skipped a beat. She froze, her fingers hovering over the controls. Was it Lark? No, it didn't feel like Lark. The AI's responses were clinical, mechanical. This felt personal. A new layer of awareness spread through her. The voice was not a physical sound. It resonated directly in her consciousness, like a whisper that had crawled from the very walls of the ship. It was alien but familiar, and it held a promise she couldn't ignore. "Who's there?" Kait whispered, though she knew it wasn't Lark that would answer. There was no immediate response, but she could feel the presence, something ancient, something vast, coiled like a serpent just beyond her reach. The sensation of being watched, of being understood, was overwhelming. "You are learning faster than I expected. But you must be careful, Kait." The voice seemed to shimmer in the air around her, as though it came from the very fabric of space itself. Kait's pulse quickened. Whoever or whatever it was aware of her every move. She hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. There was something beyond the Venom Slugs deal that she hadn't anticipated. Whoever was speaking to her, whoever was observing her, was playing a much larger game than she could have ever imagined. But even as she felt the weight of that unknown power, her resolve only solidified. Power play. The voice didn't speak again for days, but Kait didn't need it to. She had learned to trust her instincts. She had figured out that she wasn't just playing a game of survival anymore. This was about something much bigger, something that transcended her current predicament. She wasn't locked in a hold for 30 years as a mere sacrifice. No, she was a player in a galactic game of power, one where the pieces were already in motion. Her newfound knowledge of the ship's systems allowed her to bypass Lark's firewalls, accessing parts of the ship's network that were never intended to be touched by a human. As she drilled deeper into the files, she found evidence of dealings. Unsanctioned communications with other ships, encrypted trade routes, and a host of political maneuverings that linked the Venom Slugs to powerful syndicates across the galaxy. It wasn't just about immunity to parasites and boardings. The Venom Slugs had crafted an intricate web of control, and Kait had stumbled into the center of it. The voice spoke once more. This time, it wasn't a warning, but a suggestion. "You must act quickly, Kait. The power you seek is within your grasp, but there are others who will not let you claim it so easily. You are being watched by more than just the Venom Slugs." Kait's mind raced. She had known, deep down, that there were other forces at play here. This galaxy was teeming with factions, each with their own agendas, and she had become a pawn in a much larger game. But now she realized that she wasn't a pawn. She was a queen in the making. She could rise above this and use the game to her advantage. The track closes. With a newfound sense of purpose, Kait began to forge alliances within the ship's systems. She reached out to the few humans aboard the ship, those who still considered themselves loyal to humanity's cause. She fed them data, small pieces at first, just enough to get them to question the Venom Slug's motives. She subtly manipulated the flow of information, creating cracks in the foundation of the alien hierarchy. But Kait knew that she couldn't stay hidden forever. The Venom Slugs, the syndicates, Lark, everything was moving toward an inevitable confrontation. The longer she stayed in the shadows, the more danger she would be in. She had learned the hard truth. In a galaxy this dangerous, nothing came without a cost. She couldn't sit by and wait for someone else to take action. Her first true test would come soon enough. She was prepared to face the Venom Slugs, to confront the powers that sought to use her. But she had one advantage they didn't. She knew their game better than they knew hers. And now, the tides were turning.